let's dive right into something profoundly unsettling for this explainer. When we think of ancient myth, we usually picture simple tales, right? Heroes swinging swords, literal monsters lurking in the dark. But we're going to bypass all of that today. Because beneath the surface, ancient Celtic texts actually provide an incredibly sophisticated psychological framework for understanding trauma, the necessity of purpose, and the absolute fragility of human identity. We're looking at the architecture of the mind and exactly what it takes to tear it down. We have to start with what is arguably the most psychologically compelling horror concept in all of Celtic mythology. It's called An Basbók, which translates to the soft death. Now, this isn't a physical death. It's so much worse. It's a terrifying existential state where you are completely alive and functional, but your authentic self has been covertly erased. Your physical body survives, sure, but your genuine memories, your deepest relationships, your very identity, they're entirely hollowed out and replaced by illusions. The true horror of the soft death lies exactly in this contrast. Outwardly, you look fine. You're alive, you're strong, you're walking around. Those closest to you see a physical person, but they start to get this creeping sense that something essential is just gone. And inwardly, your psychological self has been completely compromised. Your memories are entirely replaced, your core purpose is forgotten, and the terrifying part is you are left with absolutely no way of knowing from the inside whether your experiences are real or just fabricated echoes. Archetypes of primordial chaos. So what causes this? Well, this brings us to the Fomorians. The Fomorians represented archetypically the absolute forces of primordial chaos. We aren't talking about physical monsters wielding clubs. These are conceptual entities predating the ordered world, embodying pure entropy and the dissolution of identity itself. They don't attack the body with physical weapons. Instead, they attack the coherent self. They systematically sever a person from their sense of purpose until their identity just collapses inward. In ancient Celtic mythology, the legendary symbol of these archetypes is mapped out with incredible structural detail in some of our oldest surviving Irish manuscripts. Take Balor of the Evil Eye, detailed in the Cath Maige Tuaid. It wasn't a literal laser beam he fired. His very gaze caused psychological dissolution. Or look at the Book of Invasions, which gives us Chickle Grisanchus, the first king of this chaos, and Alatha, a surprisingly nuanced figure. The ancient mind wasn't just telling ghost stories here. They were rigorously categorizing existential threats to the human psyche. The Sacred Oath Shield. So if the Fomorians are psychological entropy, how did the ancient mind defend against them? The answer lies in the Geas, or Geas. The mythological construct of the Geas functioned as the structural framework of a person's identity. On the surface, it was a sacred prohibition, or a profound obligation placed upon an individual. But psychologically, it wasn't merely a magical rule. It was the vital, load-bearing architecture that held a person's identity, their memory, and their purpose together as one coherent whole. You'll see this concept extensively throughout the Ulster cycle. The Geas acts as the vital thread of selfhood. It's most famously seen in the story of the legendary warrior Cuchulainn. He had multiple Geas binding him, and being forced to break them ultimately led to his tragic downfall. A Geas was essentially an oath shield. It was the psychological boundary that kept the self intact and protected the mind from dissolving into the void. Breaching the protective boundary. But what happens when that delicate architecture is compromised? Even a completely accidental violation of one's Geas was understood to immediately dissolve that protective boundary around the individual. It's like a crack in a submarine. Once that breach occurs, the mind is completely vulnerable to a systematic pattern of Fomorian attack. Authentic memories are rewritten with false illusions, identity fragments, and it inevitably ends in that terrifying soft death we discussed earlier. When that boundary breaks, the resulting breach pulls the individual into Unsell Island, the Otherworld. Now, think of this as a realm of overlapping dimensions accessible only through severe psychological vulnerability. It perfectly represents the deep unconscious space where human identity becomes entirely malleable. This is honestly one of world mythology's most sophisticated treatments of liminal space. It is a psychological void where your sense of self can be entirely rewritten by forces operating way outside of your conscious control.
Echoes in modern psychology.
What makes these ancient mythological constructs so endlessly fascinating to me is how seamlessly, how perfectly they map onto our modern clinical understanding of the human mind. That Fomorian attack pattern, it flawlessly mirrors modern descriptions of severe dissociation and the exact way that trauma fragments our autobiographical memory. It genuinely reflects the terrifying internal reality of dementia, where a person is essentially forced to watch themselves forget who they are. And the Geas perfectly mirrors how our deeply held core values are what actually maintain our identity's coherence today. Furthermore, the mythological construct of the Geas functioned as a brilliant, ancient precursor to modern existential psychiatry. Think about Viktor Frankl and his development of logotherapy. He posited that purpose acts as our ultimate psychological protection against existential dissolution. The ancient Celts intrinsically understood this thousands of years ago. Meaning structures, deep commitments, a profound sense of purpose, these are quite literally the only things that protect the self from falling apart. And this dread extends right into pure philosophy, too. This ancient framework forces us to confront the exact philosophical horror articulated centuries later by thinkers like John Locke. Locke argued that personal identity consists in the continuity of consciousness and memory. So if your authentic memories are overwritten and replaced, in the throes of the soft death, are you actually still the same person? What makes you, you? This ancient framework leaves us staring into a very dark, very modern mirror. We really have to ask ourselves, as the ancient architects of these myths surely did. If your memories were systematically replaced by illusions and your core driving purpose was completely forgotten, what exactly remains of the person you call I? If the existential architecture of your purpose breaks, would you still be you? It is a deeply unsettling question, and honestly, there is no neat resolution to it. But it's incredible to realize that thousands of years ago, people were exploring the exact same frontiers of human identity that we grapple with today. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I hope it leaves you with something profound to think about tonight.